Your budget doesn't lie. It tells you what you actually value. And we're going to get into it today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I have been informed that it's too late. It's too late on the calendar to say Happy New Year. I learned that from you. I learned that from you. This is going out on January 7th, and I'm pretty sure we're past the... Okay.
I don't know that you and I have said, the office was closed. We've only been back for a couple of days, and I don't think we've actually said Happy New Year to one another. And so this falls within my criteria.
I was under the impression that by the time we spoke for the first time, we were already past the statute of limitations on Happy New Year.
We will definitely not say it again. I'm going to see you in person in a few weeks, and that would be completely out of line if you were to say Happy New Year to me then.
Exactly. So. Well, to our audience anyway, we hope we took a couple weeks off from the podcast. You guys were busy with Christmas Eve and family and the New Year. You weren't going to be listening to us anyway. And so, I don't know, maybe you would have, maybe you missed us, but regardless, we're back. Happy New Year. We're glad to be chatting with you today about budgets. One quick thing before we get into budgets. One thing that you should put into your budget for 2026 is the Healthy Churches Toolkit. Massive, massive, massive updates and upgrades to the Healthy Churches Toolkit that we are rolling out like this month. So it's a great time to get in to the Healthy Churches Toolkit. New features around strategic planning, leadership pipeline development, and we'll have more to share about that, in coming weeks. But you should put that in your budget for this year. And today we are talking about budgets. What a fun thing to talk about at the beginning of the year.
It's appropriate. This is a good January topic.
I mean, their budgets were already set back in October, probably, but still, we're going to talk about it now.
Yeah, it's never too late to be stewarding God's resources well.
That's right, or too early. And for those of you who have a weird budget year, maybe this will help you for your upcoming budget planning. All right, you want to get into it?
Let's go. We've got a few points for you today, but the first one is that the budget tells the truth, and it will reveal where disconnects happen. And so, kind of the big picture thing that we're talking about today is values versus budget expenses.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We say we value X. Is our money going towards and proportionally towards what we say we value?
Right.
And how closely have we looked at this anytime in the recent past? So this is what we're getting into first. If you have never thought about looking at the numbers and how they reflect what you value or what you say you value, actual or aspirational, that is a good exercise to do. And maybe that pull the budget committee in on that, your elders, your church council, whatever that might be, ministry leaders, pastors, staff.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute, actually. But I think we first need to establish a little bit here in saying that your budget is the most honest document in your church. You can have a values statement, you can have a great intention or aspirations on your website, but the budget tells the truth because you really only care about what you resource and what you fund. And so there's often a gap in churches that we work with between what it is they say they value, what they want to be about as a church, and then what they're actually funding. And I think before we get too critical, because we're going to have some hard things to say, I think, today. I want to give one caveat and say I recognize in a lot of churches, because I've looked at a lot of church budgets, AJ, and I know you have too. And when you start going through them line by line by line by line, you start to go, well, where would you cut? And it's easy for us maybe as an outsider to go, oof, this is underfunded, this is overfunded. but I know what those things, those conversations are actually really hard. And I know that the margins are really thin. You can only do what's donated, despite what the culture would say, hey, we need to tax the church because it's bringing in all this money. I know that that's not, the reality is that most of you're hoping to make budget hopefully you did in 2025, you're hoping to make budget again in 2026. They're very thin margins. So anything that we're saying that might come across as critical, I want you to know that it comes from a place of love and empathy. I know how hard it is, and our intention is to serve you in sort of this critique, not to tear you down. So I just felt like it was important to say that.
Yeah, I think that's good too. And, there's also the fact that not everything of value that you say you value and do actually has a price tag attached to it. So the budget doesn't completely tell the story of what you value, because, and I kind of joke with leadership teams all the time about this when we're kind of doing it in a values process. You've heard me say this, Scott, in regards to prayer. Where do we want to demonstrate this value of prayer within our discipleship pathway? I always say, you know what? I don't care if you say you want it in every part of your pathway, as long as you do it, because prayer is free. There's never a cost associated with it. Now, if you're like, yeah, we want to hold a citywide prayer event at the convention center, and we need $80,000 to rent the convention center, that has a price tag. But you can value prayer in your church for $0 and execute on that as much as you can. You can greet guests well for free. So there's there are things outside the budget that are of great value, and so but there are some things though that do have money.
You can only do what you can afford to do.
Yeah.
So you can value something genuinely and just not have the resources to fund it. So I feel like it's important to give that nuance, because there are things that we value at the Malphurs Group that if we had more resources, we would do them. But we don't always have the resources to do that. So even our budget does reveal a lot of what we value, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And so even with that caveat, I think it's still fair to say that as we look at a lot of church budgets, there is a disconnect. And the reason why it's happened is three things. The first reason is that there's historical inertia. So, we just keep funding what we've always funded. We just kind of copy and paste from year to year. And so we assume that however we have funded it last year, that's the only way it could be. We don't have that critical eye of going, well, we could fund this differently. We could spend our money a little bit differently. We could make some changes. It doesn't have to be 40% of the budget is different. Like, we could make minor changes that would be meaningful. So, but we don't do that. We always had a line item for this, and we're going to do it. The second reason would be squeaky wheel budgeting. So the staff person or the lay leader who runs a ministry who is the most annoying or the most loud or the most persistent or has the most influence gets more of the budget than someone who's maybe less skilled at advocating for their ministry, or maybe they have the least amount of influence, or they're the newest staff person. It always rubbed me the wrong way, AJ, when I was in student ministry. I did middle school ministry, specifically grade 6 through 8, full-time, in a pretty large church. And the budget for high school ministry was almost twice what mine was for middle school ministry, but they only had one more grade. And that really frustrated me. I was like, explain to me why high school ministry gets almost twice the funding as middle school ministry, but they only have one more grade. And so I had to do the same quality and quantity of ministry on half the budget. And that always bothered me. But I was like the lowest person on the totem pole. So, I just didn't have the influence of the poll to kind of get that budget increased.
You had to buy cheap single topping pizza. They got Supremes.
Yeah. We're getting Little Caesars and they're getting Papa John's and Domino's, I'm like, wow, must be nice. Can't hide money. No, I'm not even joking. We would charge for some of our higher end snacks. Like, we would charge for candy bars and things like that to try to offset some of the cost. because we didn't have the money for it. I mean, it was cheap, but hey, $1 gets you a soda and two slices of pizza or something like that. Not all the time, but sometimes. But in the high school ministry, they're throwing snacks out like it's nothing. Man, that must be nice. And then also finally, maintenance mode wins. So, lots of times we feel like I have a church in mind in particular where this has really become the case, where so much of the budget now, because they've got an aging facility, just goes to maintaining the facility.
Yeah, common issue.
And so the maintenance beats the mission. And it's a hard conversation to have, but you go, at some point, if we don't have the people and we don't have the resources to sustain this, would we be better off letting this facility go and we could be more faithful in a different location, or doing something different with the facility, or finding other ways to use the facility that generate income to offset those costs so that we have more money available for mission. So for all of those reasons, we can develop this disconnect between what we say we value and how we're actually spending money.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I guess our first point is just kind of a general awareness and where there might be things to look at. This next piece that we just want to bring up is kind of the beginning of what do we do about this, and that would start with an audit. Let's evaluate where any misalignment might happen between what we say we value and where our money is being spent, which, again, for the reasons you just stated, Scott, might just not be on your radar. It might just be that year after year, I mean, we're within 5%. Our giving was up or down 5%. And we came in pretty close on the budget, and we're going to just go back and do the same thing again this year. So let's start with an audit. So in this process, just kind of broadly speaking, first of all, we need to look at what our values are, which obviously begs the question, do we have stated values or not? That would be a topic for another day. And we have other episodes talking about core values in the church that I would encourage you to look at.
Yeah.
But do we have stated discipleship values in the church, ministry values that we can look at and say, well, how we spend our money do we demonstrate this as a value? This is similar to what we say in our strategic envisioning process. We have discipleship goals in the church, activities or actions that we want to pursue, and can we demonstrate that we value those based on our actions or not? We're asking the same question in relation to money. Are we spending money in spaces that would identify that we truly do value that? And so is there direct alignment? Here's what we do to disciple people, and we're funding it. Just like you said, Scott, I mean, in your own experience, the lack of funding for the middle school ministry being off from the high school ministry, and I'm assuming maybe you did the math on that proportionally for if you were going by grade.
On it. Every year I
have 3 grades, you have 4, and the difference is greater than that proportional gap. So this is what we're asking you to do. I mean, we're going to call this a Scott Ball method, and you can evaluate your ministries against what you're spending, and see where we're at with that. Let's see where we're at with that. We'll get into categories here in our next piece.
Yeah. So as you're going through this audit, think about, okay, what are our steps in our discipleship pathway? Hopefully you have a discipleship pathway. Again, if you don't, you should check out our episodes on discipleship pathway, and the resources on the Healthy Churches Toolkit can help you with these things as well. But
connect with a guide.
Yes, one of our amazing guides who can take you through the strategic envisioning process in which you would build a discipleship pathway. But assuming that you have a discipleship pathway in place, look at how is your budget funding that discipleship pathway. I know that this is not how we tend to think we're funding ministries. We're funding student ministry, children's ministry. We're funding the seniors. We're funding, adult small groups, and that's fine. I mean, as it's broken down on the line items on the budget, I'm not saying that that's the wrong way to do it. That's the right way to do it. But for the purposes of this audit of going, hey, is the money matching our values? go through this process of kind of sorting that, and almost assigning like percentages, and go, okay, this this particular ministry fits within this part of our discipleship pathway, and we're funding this amount, and start to get an idea. Some expenses might support multiple steps in your discipleship pathway or something like that, and that's okay. But also think about staffing. Are we staffing for discipleship, or are we staffing for maintenance? Again, I see this a lot. It's not just in big churches, although it's often in big churches. I also see this in small churches. I was speaking with, I can't remember who this was. It doesn't matter. But, it's death by 1,000 cuts in their personnel budget, because they've got a stipend for this person and a stipend for that person, a stipend for this. And so you're bleeding out all of your cash and personnel, and you're not actually funding the ministry they're doing. You're just paying people to basically do things that a volunteer could do. And so you don't have ministry budget available because you're spending it on personnel. So audit those kinds of things too, and go, are we spending more money in personnel than we need to be? And we're going to get to that more in our next step. But just all of those kinds of questions. And this, I guess, you may have said this, AJ, this is less of a conversation for your finance team to have, which is just trying to see, do the numbers make sense? Can we afford it? And more of a leadership type conversation. The senior pastor, your elders, or your deacons, your executive team, or whatever it is that you have. This is a philosophical audit of your budget, not a financial audit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Imagine a scenario, an urban church, or maybe even an urban church plant, or, you're a few years in, and the majority of the people that are around you, that you're reaching, are non-believers. You're engaging with them, and the church is starting to grow. And you say you value God's word, you value the scriptures and teaching the scriptures, but we can't find money to be able to provide Bibles for people that are brand new to who Jesus is. That would be an example of a disconnect. We value God's word, but we don't have the money to be able to put it in somebody's hand that has never owned a Bible before and maybe can't afford it. So, you can imagine a gazillion scenarios in which this disconnect could be true for you.
Yeah, we say we value the next generation, but we have a full-time pastor, a full-time associate pastor, a full-time worship person, and one part-time person who does all of youth and children's ministry. Okay. Yet that staffing model does not tell me that you value the next generation.
And then you call us up and you go, we're just not reaching families.
We're not reaching
there's
families.
No kids. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep,
so
exactly.
Those kinds of things where you go, all right, there's a misalignment. And I get it, because you go, well, we know Jim. Jim's been here 20 years. So we there's nothing we can do about that. And go, well, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not telling you to fire Jim. I'm just saying we need to then realign our expectations. We can't say we value this and then not be able to back that up with the appropriate resources to fund that value. When we are willing to spend money on I guess our pushback on that, AJ, would be, if you've got a full-time pastor, just this hypothetical situation, full-time senior pastor, full-time associate pastor, full-time worship pastor, part-time children's youth. Okay. And we want to value the next generation. All right. Well, and you're saying, well, we can't get rid of Jim. He's the associate pastor guy. Okay, fine. Well, what does that say about what you value? I mean, to some degree, it tells us that you value Jim, which is admirable, but that you got into this situation in the first place tells us something, that you value more than reaching the next generation. I'm not saying you don't value reaching the next generation, but you value something else more than that. And that's how you got into the situation. So I don't know if you want to riff on that at all. I just, these are the kinds of situations that we see a lot. And then people wonder, gosh, I don't know why we're not doing this thing that we want to do. And I go, well, it seems pretty obvious to me. You're not resourcing the thing that you say you want.
Yeah, gosh. And of course, obviously, this is a hypothetical, and who knows what all the details will be in this hypothetical scenario.
Well, I know, but that's why these things are complicated.
That's right.
Because
A
you go,
lot of
like,
times,
what are you saying? Are you saying fire Jim? I'm like, I'm not necessarily saying fire Jim. But I'm saying, so then what I'll say sometimes to AJ to a church to go, do you have reserves? They go, oh, yeah, we do. We've got X number of dollars in reserves, and go, well, then take a risk on a full-time position. Do you have enough money to fund that position for 18 months?
Yeah.
A full-time position for that? Yes, we do. Then take that risk. Dip into your reserves to fund the full-time next generation position for 18 months and trust that that's going to help drive some growth that will help to fund that position long term. Those are the kinds of conversations you end up having. Like, well, we don't have to get rid of Jim. He doesn't have to be kicked off the island, but you have to come up with some solution.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and of course, our annual budget is, $280 and we've got $2.3 million is sitting in the bank. So, these are obviously more hypothetical things.
But we see those kinds of situations a lot. Too.
Yeah, right. Most often, of course, personnel will get. I'm not fully going into point 3 here, Scott, but we'll segue into that. We most often see these disconnects relating to personnel, because personnel is often kind of the biggest thing. A lot of times, this gets into the work that we end up doing in leadership pipeline design, because we have not sort of audited our staff in such a long time to make sure our staff, or pastoral staff especially, aligns with our values and our vision, where God is calling us. So, in the hypothetical associate pastor Jim scenario, we have seen these types of things before where, again, Jim's been there a long time. We've got 3 small groups or 3 Sunday schools. And so, well, Jim's over that. Jim oversees Sunday schools. And, Jim oversees 6 or 7 things that are all relatively minor and may not need full-time oversight. And so we have ended up creating something to justify the position, that we could redistribute things differently and achieve our discipleship and vision goals and values more effectively.
Those are such hard conversations, though, because people will go, but we love Jim.
I know.
And I go, I know that you love Jim.
Yeah.
But, there's only so many resources, and the things that Jim is doing could be done by a volunteer. And the things that can't be done by a volunteer are being done by a part-time person, or, duct taped together by a volunteer.
Man. Yeah. Well, yeah. We know more than once in the podcast, we've said we know this is harder than us sitting here saying it.
Yeah.
But you know what? Our job, though, is to bring difficult things to your consciousness, because we want your churches to be healthy and thrive. And sometimes that is not easy, and it does require difficult leadership decisions. There's no way around that.
Yeah. So maybe just as a way to kind of wrap up point 2, which is, point 1, just to go back to that, was there is often a disconnect between what we value and what we fund. Step 2, or point 2, is to encourage you to do an audit, not a financial audit, but a philosophical sort of values budget audit, and go, are we funding the things that we value? And here's a key reality check question I'd like for you to ask yourself. If an outsider, like a consultant or even just a random visitor to your church, only saw your budget, they never looked at your website, they never walked into your building and saw the banners or whatever that you have on the wall, but they only looked at your budget, what would they say that you value? And having that kind of attitude and that kind of fresh look at your budget might reveal some things that you might not like. It might require a hard conversation to clean up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into, point 3 finally, and this is the realignment process. And we'll start off by just giving you kind of this rule of thumb budgeting buckets that we have used here in our organization, for decades, because Dr. Malphurs, our founder, talked about this, and this is not unusual, but 4 budget buckets. And we'll kind of work our way from heaviest down to lightest as far as budget category goes. So the first one is personnel. And the way we've always spoken of this is that it would be not more than about 50% of the budget. This is not chiseled in stone. This is a rule of thumb. Not more than about 50% of your budget. The second category being sort of operational expenses, facilities expenses, being not more than about 20% of your budget. And another way you can look at this is somewhat, we have some grace in combining these and saying that we don't spend more than about 70% on these two large expense categories combined.
Yeah.
The reason we say that is because different phases of life cycle in the church are going to weigh these things in different ways. A church plant is going to have perhaps, if this can vary, the expense maybe is lower or higher. You're renting a space where you live in a city. Everything is very expensive. You're spending a ton of money on facilities. Nobody's getting paid. And so that's all crazy. Later, you might have a couple of people being paid, a pastor and somebody else. That's taking up a big chunk of the budget. And so anyway, you can see what I'm saying.
Or it could be a church plant where the pastor's full time, he's getting paid, and that's a lot of the expense. They're in a facility that they're borrowing. They're sharing a facility with an existing church, and their rent is next to nothing.
Right.
So their ops costs are really low.
Yeah.
So,
all right, moving on. The third one is ministries funding. And the way we speak of it is at least 20% of your budget going to ministries, funding like the actual things that become programmatic in the church, making sure that the things that we are doing together have the money to do what they are supposed to be doing from a values perspective.
Yeah. And non-personnel ministry expenses.
Yeah, right. This would have covered middle school pizza for you, Scott.
Middle school pizza. That's right.
And then the final category is at least 10% going to missions. And this can be local or global missions, divided up however God has called you for that endeavor in ministry. Your Jerusalem,
church planting,
Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
So
giving to your association, if you're Baptist, like your cooperative giving, all of those kinds of things. And these are budgeted monies. I recognize that a lot of churches do like special offerings, like maybe an annual special offering or semi-annual
outside the budget,
and you don't need to include those numbers necessarily in this, except it's a little bit like if you get a bonus every year and you expect that bonus essentially as part of your salary, then even though it's a bonus and not a salary, you really ought to think of that as part of your budget. The same thing would be true, I think, when it comes to this. If we know that we're going to, because we've had churches that do this in fuzzy math. We know we're going to get an extra $50,000 a year that comes in, and it's been reliable for the last decade or 5 years. There's going to be an extra $50K that comes in through this mechanism towards missions. I think you should kind of consider that as part of your mission spending. Then maybe if you know that $50K is going to come in for missions through a special offering every year, and it's pretty consistent, then that should be considered part of your missions giving. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think a truly special offering or whatever, that's less consistent, different.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But if you know that this is coming and it's about this amount every year, that should go into that 10% number. So you don't need to spend as much out of your regular budget because you know that this revenue is coming in every year for missions.
If you do salary bonuses and you decide to cut them and sign people up instead for the Jelly of the Month Club, tell them ahead of time.
Give them notice, yeah. And actually just don't give them a bonus because those get taxed differently. So just give them a raise.
Or call it tips instead. No tax then. Exactly. Tip jar on the altar. Okay, that's seems to be where our culture is headed anyway.
It's just a shoebox with cash hidden, buried behind a tree. This is not legal advice. We're joking. Good grief.
Not tax advice or legal advice.
No.
Okay. All right. So there's your categories: personnel, ops / facilities, ministries, and missions. I think this is a great starting point. You can get more granular from there, but this is a great place to start, especially if you've never done an exercise like this before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the problem is not that 70% of your budget is going to fixed costs. I think sometimes when you hear a criticism of the budget and go, oh, your values don't match your budget, you're like, well, but it costs, staffing costs a lot. And so does, we had to replace the roof, and those things cost a lot of money. And what are you saying, that we don't have a roof on the building? Like, no, the problem, of course, the majority of your income, the majority of your revenue is going to go out towards fixed cost things. And you don't have a lot of control over what those things cost or how much you're spending or how you're allocating it. I get that totally. It's in those discretionary numbers that we see such disparity and problems. And it's hard to say this, but it is not uncommon for us to see a church that is giving 12, 13, 14, 15% in missions giving, and they're only funding all of their internal ministries at 4, 5, 6%. It's extremely common.
Which is a hard conversation to have too, right? Because
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
you can't argue against, oh, you overvalue missions. This is the talk we're having. This is the episode today, right? Budget versus values. And you're like, yeah, we're giving a ton to church planting in China, or whatever the heck it is we're funding.
Yeah.
That is of high value. But sometimes, and maybe you're surprised to hear this, because maybe you're the church that's like, no, we are funding ministries and we're only at 3% going to missions, and we feel awful about that and we want to increase that. You're like, who could possibly be overfunding missions and be in the opposite scenario? But they do exist.
It exists.
But we have to look at everything, we just have to look at everything and decide, are we underfunding something that should be valued at a higher level than we're presently allocating money to?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that, when you say, okay, we're giving 15% of our budget to missions and outreach, that doesn't reveal necessarily that you value evangelism. It reveals that you value giving to missions. And that's a hard thing to swallow, because it's easier to write a check and to outsource evangelism to the professionals than it is to fund a ministry inside of your church that's actually reaching your neighbors, to be the boots on the ground in your neighborhood, talking with people, reaching students, buying them pizza. Those things are harder than sending a check to whatever missions organization and say, you do this.
That's truth. Yeah.
And I'm not here to tell you that it's bad to fund missions. I'm telling you it's bad to underfund your ministries. And if you're looking at your budget and you're going, well, you can't get blood from a stone, you're looking at it and there's no wiggle room on the personnel, there's no wiggle room on the ops. Then where is the wiggle room? The wiggle room is usually on the missions and outreach side of things, of the equation, and just trying to, even if you could get it to 10% missions and 10% to your ministries, that would be an improvement. And financial resources are fuel for ministry. I know that we don't want to think that way, but it's absolutely true. It is 100% true. Your ministries cannot thrive without resources.
Yeah.
They can't. You can't grow a business. You can't grow a family. You can't expand a ministry. You can't grow a nonprofit with no money. You need these things to do the mission, to accomplish the mission. And when you put a bold mission and a bold vision in front of a ministry and say, we want you to reach the next generation. I don't know why I keep harping on student ministry, but we want you to have excellent worship. We want you to teach people the Bible, and you go, and your budget is $100 a month. How exactly do you expect them to do that?
Yeah. This is a bit of the, put your oxygen mask on first before helping others,
Yeah.
kind of parallel here. You will be able to do more in missions. I mean, I don't want this to end up sound like we're beating up on missions
Yeah.
giving. I mean, it's not,
Especially since we benefit from missions giving, so we
yeah, really.
yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about balance. We're talking about balancing
Yeah.
funding, discipleship and values funding. So, but you'll be able to do more in missions later, local and global, when you have grown a church of mature disciples effectively and efficiently. And so, but often we do see this. They're crippled. The church is crippled. And, some missionaries may be thriving, but the church is crippled, and it's hard to break out of that. It's so hard to build that more momentum, where if we could fund what we need here and build momentum, we're going to do that plus a ton more,
Yes.
Beyond.
Yeah. As an organization that partially requires donor funding in order to exist, largely needs donor funding in order to exist. Even we're saying we would rather see a church investing in its ministries, because we know that that's going to ultimately be an investment in missions long term.
Yeah.
Because the church grows, the revenue base for that church through donations grows because it's healthier, and people are maturing as disciples and wanting to invest in the mission. So it's maybe even in our own self-interest to go, no, actually you should give less, not less, but you should give the right proportion of your budget to missions.
Yeah.
And
again, as with these staff bonuses, we don't get to December and then send a letter to our missionaries, and say, sorry, in January, we're cutting your funding.
No.
That's not how we handle it. That would be the equivalent of the Jelly of the Month Club. So
yeah,
we need,
hold on. That might be a great way to sort of start wrapping this up. Is like, if you were to do an audit of your budget and go, well, our buckets are way out of whack. The solution to that is not nuking your budget and totally reordering it next year, because that would create casualty, maybe with missionaries, or with organizations you support, or personnel, or whatever. That would be a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. So don't do that. That is not the advice we are giving you. If you see misalignment, unless you absolutely have to, like if it's a survival mode situation, you may have to. But in 99 out of 100 circumstances, that's not the case. So take a long view and go, what will we shift next year to get more in alignment? We don't need to get from 5% funding ministries to 20% in a year. We could let's go from 5 to 8% next year. Let's get to 12% the year after that. Let's get to 15%. And maybe we're happy at 15% for a while, because if we did much more than that, more shifting than that, then that's going to create more damage than it would help. All of that nuance is okay. But take a 3 to 5 year view on shifting the budget, not an overnight 1 year view. I just want to be really clear about that, because you could do more damage than help if you were to make a huge shift in a year.
And we advocate zero-based budgeting. I mean, fund ministry with what you need to do that ministry. So base it on that. Like, here's our ministry goals. What's it going to take financially to make that happen? And then, of course, you have to deal with what do we actually have to work with, and make changes to make it all fit. And this is a similar thing. Your advice is excellent, Scott. You would do this, and a lot of churches also find this. We've been underpaying our pastor and other staff members, and we at some point we do a salary study, and we're like, oh, we really are really far behind. And you have to roll that out over a number of years. We can do a 3% increase this year. Next year, we're going to do 3.5. We're going to do 4 the following year. And then we're going to be like at least within the range. And we'll be able to, work our way up to better personnel funding levels. So don't do this in year one.
No. No, again, I guess the exception would be if you're in a catastrophic situation.
Yeah.
Then, and you've really got to go, okay, how are we surviving? What are the changes we need to make? those are harder conversations, and we get that. But most churches are not in that situation. You've got enough wiggle room to make a change over a long period of time. Actually, I was just doing a budget audit for a church a couple of weeks ago, and I gave this advice. I was like, your ministry budgets are massively underfunded, and I gave the advice: take time to start shifting that, because they are seeing they're seeing the consequences of that. They're actually, next generation is one of the things they go, we want to reach the next generation. We're not doing it. And the reality is you're not funding it. So all of the intention is there, the infrastructure is there, but the money isn't. So you're going to need to shift some resources if you want to see that outcome.
All right. Well, there you go. Budgeting to live out your values. And I hope this has been helpful for everybody this week. It's something that you'll see the benefits from long term. The Lord will bless it, and I think the work of your hands will bear much fruit whenever you get all of these things in alignment. I know we don't like to talk about money in the church, but it is necessary, and it's good and it's right for leaders to do that. So thank you for being with us, everybody. Be sure and check out the Healthy Church's Toolkit because, as Scott said at the top of the show, we've got some amazing things about to launch there. You're going to want to be ready for that. Take advantage of it for your ministry. And also visit the malphursgroup.com website and check out the guides that are available to come alongside you and assist your church in doing these kinds of things, helping you evaluate budgets and work through strategic planning and the alignment of your staff to maximize the work that you're doing. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week.